Hello and welcome. Tonight, allow me to guide you ever so gently into the hush of forgotten centuries, where the moon casts soft shadows over cobbled streets and laughter from distant lands echoes like lullabies across time. We are stepping into the peculiar, mysterious and often bewildering world of medieval entertainment, not as modern travellers, but as dreamers brushing our fingers against parchment and legend. This is not a tale of kings or battles, nor of sweeping romances or towering castles, but of something stranger. Tonight, we drift into the curious corners of history to discover the strange things people did for fun in medieval times. So, nestle in, close your eyes if you wish, and let's begin. Long before Netflix, nightclubs, or even parlour games, the people of the Middle Ages, from the sleepy hamlets of the English countryside to the misty towns of the German woods, found joy, laughter, and distraction in ways that may puzzle us now. Their amusements could be violent, bizarre, eerie, or outright surreal. Yet to them, it was simply a way of life, a way to escape the cold stone walls of daily toil, the rigid codes of feudal existence, and the ever-present shadow of faith and fate. Let's begin then with a game, one played not with dice, nor with cards, but with fear. In a quiet corner of a village, imagine a grassy field at the edge of the forest. The sun dips low, turning the sky into a bowl of amber and violet. A crowd gathers. Peasants, their faces ruddy with drink and toil, cluster around a crude wooden platform. Perched upon it, a man with eyes like pinpricks and a grin stretched taut across his face begins to shout, "Bring forth the bear!" This was no metaphor. Bear baiting was one of the strangest and most disturbing entertainments of the medieval period. But unlike the slick cruelty of Roman gladiators or modern-day blood sports, this game was steeped in ritual and a strange sense of community. To bait the bear was not just to watch, it was to participate in the rawness of life and death, to laugh in the face of danger and chaos. The bear, often chained to a post, would be goaded, teased, and attacked by dogs bred for aggression. The crowd would cheer as the animal thrashed and snarled. For many, it was a kind of living theatre, a contest of power, strength, and the whims of fate. Sometimes a nobleman might even sponsor such a performance, turning it into a twisted pageant, complete with music, feasting, and betting. But beneath the horror of it, one finds something strangely tender in the crowd's gaze. They did not hate the bear. Often they loved it, named it, cheered for it, and remembered it. The bear, in a way, became a character in their collective tale. When it fell, they mourned. When it triumphed, they toasted. And yet, this wasn't the only beast called upon for joy. There were dancing monkeys with tiny lutes, acrobatic pigs trained to leap through hoops, and geese tethered to wooden wheels, spun around in dizzying circles for the amusement of watching them wobble. To us, it may seem cruel, a kind of carnival gone terribly wrong. But in those days when mortality pressed close and life was often brief, laughter, even if tinged with madness, was precious. In one town, an old folk tale tells of a rooster dressed as a knight. The villagers, having brewed too much ale and eager for a diversion, sewed tiny armour onto the poor creature and watched as it battled a fox, a trained one, declawed and half asleep. The crowd roared, not just at the absurdity, but at the sheer act of imagining something so impossible. A knighted rooster, a hero bird. It's easy to laugh, but this kind of play, wild, unpredictable, tinged with danger, was a kind of storytelling. These were not just games, but metaphors. The bear was the king of the forest. The rooster, a commoner who dared to be noble. They were mirrors of a society starved of myth, yet surrounded by it. There was another pastime, stranger still, known as the Feast of Fools. This event, typically held around the New Year, was a deliberate inversion of the world. Priests wore masks and sang bawdy songs in the church. Choir boys elected a mock bishop who would lead processions through the town, blessing pigs and shouting nonsense Latin. Everything serious became silly. The sacred turned profane, and for just a moment the world felt upside down. This inversion, oddly enough, was sacred in its own way. By mocking the hierarchy, people reaffirmed its power. By playing at chaos, they made sense of order. And so the Feast of Fools became both rebellion and reverence. A laugh in the face of heaven, but with tears behind it. Elsewhere, men gathered not to jest, but to test themselves in trials of the bizarre. One such event was known simply as hot cockles. The rules were simple. One player covered their eyes and knelt, while others took turns smacking him on the back. The goal? Guess who struck you. If you guessed right, they took your place. If not, the smacking continued. But why? Some say it was a test of senses, others a playful punishment. And for many, it was simply fun, the thrill of being touched, of guessing, of laughing at pain in a world where real hurt was never far away. Strange how something so small could bind people together. We move now to another custom, quieter, more somber, but equally strange. Living wake celebrations. In some towns, when an elder reached a venerable age, they might be honoured with a funeral, while still alive. Friends would gather, eulogies would be read, feasts prepared, and music played. The elder, swaddled in ceremonial clothes, would lie in a symbolic coffin and listen to their praises. It was not morbid, it was loving, a way to say goodbye before death claimed the right. To some, it was a gift to hear all the words people often saved for the grave. To others, it was eerie. Still, it gave joy, comfort, a sense of closure, not after, but before. And then there were the puppets, not delicate marionettes of kings and queens, but grotesque, exaggerated figures made of rags and wood. Mummercraft, as it was sometimes called, brought these puppets to life in marketplaces, in taverns, or even inside homes. With voices shrill and exaggerated, these creatures reenacted village scandals, royal gossip, or folk legends twisted with wild humour. Children laughed, adults winced, but all watched. As our journey into medieval amusements begins to take root, we realise something simple, yet profound. Strangeness was not an exception, it was the norm. In a world haunted by plague, shadowed by war, and ruled by rigid law, joy had to find new shapes. Laughter wore strange clothes, and play was often tinged with fear, wonder, and dreams. Let's rest here for a while. The night is still long, and there are many tales left to tell, stranger, deeper, and more dreamlike still. In the gentle hush of another medieval dawn, the world stirs again, not with the clang of swords or the toll of church bells, but with a quiet hum of preparation. The village is not yet awake, not fully, but something peculiar is afoot. You see, today is not an ordinary day. It is the day of the Laughing Pilgrimage. Imagine a narrow dirt road winding past low cottages and chicken coops, the path lined with pale blue cornflowers and damp patches from the morning mist. Along it marches a slow but spirited procession. They do not carry relics or sing hymns. They wear outlandish costumes, cabbage leaves for hats, sticks tied to shoes to lengthen their stride, ribbons sewn to their sleeves, and masks carved with exaggerated smiles. These are not jesters, not actors, but pilgrims of laughter. Once a year, in small corners of France and the Low Countries, certain groups of villagers would embark on this strange tradition. Known by different names in different regions, but often simply referred to in folklore as the Laughing Pilgrimage, this event was a symbolic journey toward nothing, a walk with no shrine, no destination, and no relics to worship, only absurdity to be found along the way. They would walk for hours, sometimes days, stopping at towns along the route to perform ridiculous tasks. One man might pretend to be a confused bishop blessing turnips, another might deliver a sermon on the virtues of sneezing with flair. They would collect sins from the people they passed, written on bits of parchment, a broken pot, a spilled ale, a kiss stolen in the barn. These sins were read aloud in gibberish, then ceremoniously thrown into a pig trough filled with mud. People laughed, they forgot their aches, and for a brief moment, the old, the tired, and the worried became travellers in a world that obeyed no rule but joy. Yet joy in the medieval world was often a quiet rebellion. One had to seek it slyly, to wear it like a hidden brooch under plain clothes. And so the laughter that came from these mock pilgrimages was more than noise. It was a balm against the weight of the age. Let us walk with them a little while longer. The path leads to a town square, already brimming with anticipation. There, the next ritual begins, the trial of the donkey. This was no simple play. The donkey, often borrowed from a kindly farmer who had more sense than pride, was brought before a makeshift judge. A local fool was appointed prosecutor. Children were chosen as scribes. The charges were grave: loitering in holy spaces, consuming unblessed hay, braying during the vicar's sermon. The townsfolk crowded close, giggling behind their sleeves. The donkey, patient and confused, chewed quietly. Its innocence was never in question. Yet the trial proceeded with utmost seriousness. Witnesses were called. A goose, led by a boy with freckles and mischief in his eyes, was presented as the first. The boy bent low, interpreting the goose's testimony. The goose states, he declared solemnly, that the donkey made rude noises and tried to eat her nest. Gasps erupted, followed by roars of laughter. This strange courtroom drama might end in a declaration of guilt. The donkey, sentenced to carry flowers through town while wearing a hat made of laundry and thistles, or perhaps it would be acquitted and awarded a cabbage. Either way, the crowd left smiling. But not all medieval fun was shared in the open. Let us leave the sunlight for a moment and descend into the shadows, into the cool silence of a monastic cellar. Here, under arches of ancient stone, a different game unfolds. The monks of certain abbeys, those far from royal scrutiny and inclined toward more human pleasures, would sometimes engage in what was called silent theatre. During long seasons of fasting and prayer, speech was limited. Silence was a virtue. But even silence needs escape, so they created an art of performance without words. With robes as costumes and candlelight as their only stage, they mimed stories of saints with comical twists. St. Peter, portrayed as a clumsy fisherman. The devil stumbling over his own tail. Even the abbot himself might appear, played by a younger monk with exaggerated bows and winks, waddling about in mock seriousness. There was no laughter allowed, but eyes twinkled, shoulders shook, and in the deep stillness, joy found a whisper. Up above, in the wider world, troubadours wandered from town to town, carrying songs of love and war. But some of them, a rare few, performed tales that were never written, only passed on through hushed voices and knowing looks, tales of the backwoods kingdom. This imaginary land, invented on tavern benches and in shepherds' fields, was a mirror of the real world. In it, kings served beggars, fish hunted men, children taught the priests, and cows debated philosophy. Troubadours would take turns improvising these tales, each adding to the absurdity. And then, one might say, the queen declared that all bread must be worn on the feet. For bread, she believed, absorbed wicked thoughts. The crowd would groan, then cheer. In a time when the church held truths tightly and books were rare, these stories gave people a way to question the world through laughter. And then there were the stones. Not just any stones, but talking ones. Some villages believed that certain stones could speak, not in voices, but through what they called the game of echoes. Late at night, children would dare each other to whisper secrets into specific stones carved with strange symbols or worn by years of rain. Then, the next day, another child would approach and put their ear to the same stone. What they heard was often nonsense, giggles, rustles, or a friend hiding behind a bush. But to them, it was magic. They created elaborate mythologies around the stone spirits, assigning names, traits, even favourite meals. "Flintella likes berries," one girl whispered, "but never cherries. Cherries make her hiccup and thunder comes." This innocent game became part of the landscape. Stones were marked and honoured. Villagers would pause before them, tip their hats, and sometimes leave small offerings, a feather, a thimble, a bit of honeycomb. It was perhaps their way of weaving wonder into the earth itself. As night falls once more and the fires in the village die down, a hush returns. But it is not empty. It is full of giggles, of footsteps on distant paths, of monks hiding smiles behind their hoods. The medieval world, for all its darkness, never forgot to laugh, in courtrooms of donkeys, in pilgrimages to nowhere, in stories told to stones. Let us rest again now. The fire is low, the embers glow softly, and in the stillness the echoes of strange joys continue to flicker through time. In the soft rustling of twilight, as the last warmth of the sun dissolves into the horizon, we find ourselves drawn toward a gathering not far from the riverbanks. A circle of figures cloaked in fur, feathers and ribbons, their faces hidden behind masks, shaped like wolves, store creatures that never truly existed. Tonight, they dance. But this is no simple village revel. This is the dance of the wild ones. In deep forested regions, from the frost-kissed Carpathians to the emerald canopies of Brittany, rural folk once believed in what they called turn nights, liminal evenings between seasons, when the barriers between the mundane and the magical grew thin. And on these nights they danced, not as themselves, but as something other. They painted their faces with ash, smeared honey on their lips to tempt the forest's whisper, and wore animal hides passed down for generations. The dances were frenzied, wordless, with stomping feet and wide, unblinking eyes. Drums made of bark and stretched hide echoed through the woods, while flutes carved from bone shrieked like birds at dusk. No audience came to watch, no feast followed. It was not for celebration, it was for transformation. The belief passed on in whispers and winter stories was that by shedding their human skin, both literally and metaphorically, they could trick fate into forgetting them for a while. That grief, illness, or bad omens might pass over their homes if the spirits thought no one lived there but beasts. Some said they danced for fun, others said they danced for survival. And for those who did not dance, another ritual waited. In taverns tucked between crumbling walls and moss-covered signs, groups would gather for a peculiar game known as the tongues duel. It was not a duel of swords, but of insults, a tradition beloved by brewers, fishmongers, and minor lords alike. Two contestants would stand before a fire, surrounded by townsfolk, and exchange insults, not cruel, but clever, poetic, and absurd. One might say, "Your mother weaves socks for scarecrows because even the crows pity your feet." And the other would reply, "If wit were wine, you'd die of thirst, though I suspect you'd enjoy the dryness." The crowd would ooh and ah, and a local elder, usually the oldest woman in the room, would act as judge. The loser had to buy drinks for everyone present, and the winner? Their name would be etched into the wooden beam above the bar until someone else bested them. Sometimes the duels became legends. Travelling insult masters, wandering tongue knights, would visit multiple towns collecting stories and jests, boasting scars not on their bodies but on their pride. They were feared, adored, and occasionally chased out with thrown onions when they overstepped their charm. But beneath the raucous laughter was something sacred, a shared joy in language, a respect for wit over war, for words that cut without blood. Elsewhere, in sun-baked Mediterranean corners, another custom had begun to blossom, the game of echoed lies. It was played among women during laundry gatherings by the river. As their hands scrubbed linens on smooth stones and water lapped at their ankles, they would take turns crafting a wild lie and passing it down the line. One would begin, "Last night I saw a cat give birth to 7 lambs under the full moon." The next might say, "And each lamb had a bell on its tail that sang when it rained." And another would add, "They sang so sweetly the miller wept, and his tears turned to wine." By the end, the story would be told again in full, embroidered with each woman's addition. It was nonsense, of course, but in a time when women's voices were rarely recorded, it was their form of authorship, their theatre, their rebellion through wonder. These gatherings were filled with laughter, but also with connection. The stories became inside jokes, family lore, and even lullabies passed on to children. And always, always they began with a wink. Do you remember the cat who bore the singing lambs? In more isolated settlements, fun took stranger forms still. In one town, it is said that villagers held contests for the most useless invention. These weren't inventions in the true sense. They were absurd contraptions carved from scrap wood, bits of cloth or metal from discarded tools. One man created a spoon that twisted like a corkscrew. Another presented a hat with a candle holder that always melted wax into the wearer's eye. A woman once brought forth the chicken ladder, a staircase made for hens to train them for high society. The laughter, so loud it startled the livestock, was the true prize. Winners received a crown of nettles and a title, Master of Nothing. But the inventions were paraded around town, hung from trees like trophies. Some even claimed that nobles from nearby castles sent spies to witness the contest and returned giggling behind velvet curtains. Even the dead were not spared from the games of the living. In parts of Eastern Europe, tales persist of the merriment mornings. These were funerals for objects, broken tools, lost shoes, cracked pots. When an item that had served a family faithfully for years finally gave in to time, it was not thrown away without ceremony. Instead, it was buried. Villagers would gather in sombre lines. A small procession would carry the object on a bier of woven branches. Speeches would be made. A wooden ladle might be remembered as the stirrer of many soups, the silencer of hunger, and the bruiser of greedy fingers. A bent rake might be praised for breaking backs to feed the barn. Children cried, adults wept from laughter, and in the end, the object would be placed in a hole, covered gently with dirt and marked with a pebble or ribbon. These ceremonies reminded people that even the smallest part of life was worth honouring, that nothing, not even a spoon, passed without meaning. Some regions developed tales around these burials. It was whispered that, under certain moons, these discarded objects danced in the woods, grateful for their farewell. If you listened closely, said the children, you could hear the ladles clacking together in applause. And perhaps strangest of all, in the foggy borderlands between France and Germany, a peculiar sport emerged: snail racing. Unlike modern versions, this was not about speed. No, this was about artistry. Snails were painted with flower-based dyes, swirls of blue, tiny stars, little faces. Each snail was placed on a polished wooden board under a magnifying glass held by a carved frame. Spectators leaned in, faces lit by candlelight, watching as the creatures began their slow crawl toward a finish line. The real contest wasn't who won. It was which snail danced. If a snail turned in an elegant circle, paused at the centre, or crossed its own trail in a perfect spiral, it earned cheers. Bets were placed not on speed, but on style. Names like Lady Whimsy, Sir Ooze and the Velvet Ghost became known across taverns and trading posts. Children bred snails in secret, whispering hopes of finding a glider, one of the mythical racers said to leave behind a trail shaped like a rune. Entire summer nights were spent watching, giggling, hoping. In these quiet and curious corners, we find again that strangeness was a language, a way to make life softer, more shimmering, more bearable. Whether in a duel of insults, a masked dance in the woods, or a funeral for a broken broom, people found joy in the unexpected, in the absurd, and in the deeply human need to laugh even in the shadows. The world then was smaller, darker, perhaps harsher. But their imaginations, they stretched farther than the stars. Beneath the low-hanging skies of a grey spring morning, the village stirs to a different kind of rhythm. There is no church bell tolling, no market song echoing between cottages. Instead, there is a sound both solemn and silly, the thump of boots against hollow wood, the creak of ropes, and above all, a peculiar chorus of hoots, chirps, and yelps. It is the day of the human menagerie. To witness it is to enter a pageant where people no longer pretend to be people. They become beasts, not just in costume, but in posture, in mind, in spirit. This strange event, found in small corners of Northern Europe, particularly in the Flemish regions, was part performance, part release, part spiritual metaphor. The villagers would elect keepers, roles often filled by the elderly or respected craft workers, and everyone else would draw lots to determine what creature they would become for the day. Not all animals were equal, of course. To become a fox meant you had to steal food with cunning. To be an ox, you pulled a wheelbarrow and pretended to low with deep groans. Some were assigned as hens and had to cluck, peck, and flap through the village while roosters crowed obnoxiously from rooftops. Children were made to be squirrels and tasked with hiding imaginary nuts in people's pockets or the eaves of houses. Even the village fool was sometimes made to play a barn cat, prowling with exaggerated grace, hissing at the baker or curling up to nap on the altar steps. It may have seemed ridiculous, even infantile, but the human menagerie held deeper meaning for the villagers. They believed, in ways hard to put into words, that animals understood truths humans had long forgotten, that beasts did not lie, did not covet, did not mask desire. To become them, if only for a day, was to be honest. The keepers would herd the animals through town, feeding them oats, giving commands, and punishing those who broke character. A donkey that tried to speak like a man might find itself tied to a pole and made to bray a full minute before being released. The punishment was never cruel. It was part of the play, part of the pageantry, part of the strange charm. As dusk approached, the animals were freed in a mock ritual where a wooden gate was wheeled into the square and opened wide. The creatures, one by one, passed through it, kissed a carved statue of St. Francis, and returned to their human selves. And in that transformation, some claimed they felt something shift inside, a sliver of peace, of clarity, of the soul stepping out from behind the veil of pride. In other places, where the sea brushed close to the land and the wind carried salt across fields, a different amusement was whispered among sailors and their kin, a game known as tide-telling. It began as a superstition, a necessity for those whose lives depended on the ocean's moods. But over generations, it turned into a kind of performance art. Villagers would gather at the edge of the shore during full moons or solstice tides. There, a self-appointed tide teller, always an elder who'd never left the coastline, would step forward wearing robes stitched with seaweed, shells and driftwood. They would draw strange symbols in the sand, sniff the breeze with exaggerated flair, and begin to chant. By the belly of the whale and the beak of the gull, the tide will rise with secrets tonight. The crowd, half mocking and half mystified, would lean in. The tide teller's predictions were rarely accurate, sometimes ludicrous, claiming that the sea would bring black stones that turned to bread, or that a mermaid's sigh would cause fish to fly from the waves like birds. But accuracy was never the point. It was about storytelling. A performance shared under starlight, laughter echoing over dark waters. The predictions were later reviewed like town gossip. "Did you see?" someone might whisper the next morning. "Old Marla said the tide would sing, and I swear the wind howled a tune last night." In some villages, they built driftwood shrines to honour the tide's humour, a belief that the sea played tricks just to amuse itself. Children left salt on the stones to feed the water spirits, and some fishermen refused to speak during high tide, fearing their words would be carried off and turned into storms. On the opposite side of the social world, deep in the fortified walls of castles and manor halls, nobles too found their own peculiar pastimes. Among the more curious was the Feast of Reflections. It was not a real feast, nor was it truly reflective, at least not in the way one might expect. The noble lords and ladies would gather in a long hall filled with polished brass, mirrors, bowls of still water and silvery fabrics. Each guest wore a mask, not over the face, but over their reflection. Masks affixed to mirrors, to shields, to anything that could reflect light. The game was to try to reveal the identity of others only by their behaviour and voice, all while keeping one's own reflection obscured. Servants were trained to bring wine and fruit without glancing at the guests, for even their gaze might betray someone's form. It was a strange, dreamlike event. Soft lute music played, whispered poetry was exchanged, secrets were confessed in riddles, but behind the beauty there was tension. Hidden alliances were tested, scandals teased at the edges. It was, in truth, a power game, cloaked in beauty, drenched in symbolism. The noble women called it the petal court, referring to how delicate and veiled each movement had to be. No footsteps too loud, no laugh too sharp. Everything must flow, shimmer, suggest. It lasted hours, and when it ended, the masks were removed in silence. Some claimed to have recognised every person. Others admitted they were completely fooled. But one tradition never wavered. No one ever revealed what they'd said during the feast. It was considered a sin against elegance. Further inland, among the simple folk of mountain villages, another odd practice took hold: echo singing. This game required two singers and a valley. One would climb a hill at sunrise, the other would stay below near the sleeping houses. As the sky lightened, they would begin to sing, slow, sad melodies that spiraled into the mist. The goal was not volume nor beauty, but resonance. The upper singer would pause after each line, waiting for the echo to return. The lower singer would then respond, not with the same line, but with the continuation, as if the echo had changed the meaning. "I dreamt of fire on the hill," sang the one above. "Then wake, for the smoke touches your roof," came the echo's answer. It was music woven with distance, a song made with air, with space, with delay. Some villagers listened in reverence, others simply smiled, warming their hands on tea as the notes drifted past. Children tried to join, of course, climbing halfway, singing nonsense verses, and were sometimes allowed a turn. But only the seasoned echo singers could guide the valley's breath. One famous pair, a brother and sister, became known in 4 villages for their morning duets. It was said they once sang a whole conversation about a missing scarf, turned it into a ballad of longing, and by the end, the entire town was humming it like a hymn. The echo was their stage, their partner, their invisible audience. And as the sun finally rose high and the last note dissolved into birdsong, the singers would return. Not proud, not tired, but cleansed somehow. The strangeness of these customs, animal pantomimes, masked reflections, songs sung to valleys and tides, tells us something delicate, something fragile about the medieval soul. That even when life pressed heavily with duty and drought, even when time was counted by the sun and survival often overshadowed delight, the human heart still craved games, mysteries, and ways to shape meaning out of the ordinary. And so they invented them, not always grand, rarely logical, but endlessly human. A hush falls across the meadow, soft as breath on glass, as the moon begins its slow climb through the treetops. The village is quiet now, homes tucked under the weight of thatch and sleep. But near the edge of the wood, in a circle of standing stones forgotten by most, a small group stirs. They carry bundles of herbs, buckets of milk, and wooden dolls with button eyes. This is the hour of the silent bargain. Few knew of it. Fewer still admitted to taking part. It was not a game, not quite, but a form of amusement nonetheless, for those who walked the trembling edge between belief and play. Once a year, during the night of the spring equinox, participants would gather in secret under the old stones to bargain with the invisible. The rules were simple, but strange. No one could speak from the moment they entered the circle. No fire was allowed, only moonlight and memory. Each participant would present an offering, something small, meaningful, and peculiar. A single braid cut from one's own hair, a cracked teacup filled with honey, a drawing scratched into bark. They would place their offering on the stones, kneel, and in their mind whisper a wish, not for riches or revenge, but for something intangible. A dreamless sleep, a lost laugh, the return of someone's scent in the spring air. Once the wish was made, they would rise, turn thrice widdershins, and leave without looking back. But the strangest part? In the morning, the offerings would be changed. The braid might be replaced with a feather soaked in rain. The cracked cup might now hold pebbles arranged in a spiral. No one ever saw who or what made the exchange. Some believed it was fairies. Others, spirits of the old stones. Some simply said, "It is us," pretending to be magic for each other. Children, once old enough, were allowed to attend, but only if they could keep silent for the full hour. They were always the most amazed the next day, their dolls replaced with carved toads. Their wishes perhaps answered in the flutter of a strange bird landing on their windowsill. In the daylight, it was all laughed off. A village game, a mid-spring prank. But each year, more people came. And each year, more offerings were left. A strange ritual of unspoken hope, where the fun was folded tightly with mystery. Elsewhere, far to the south, where the fields shimmer golden and the dust clings to every window pane, we find ourselves in a town famous for its grandest absurdity, the parade of slightly important people. It began, according to legend, with an insult. A duke once passed through the town and was unimpressed. "There is no one important here," he'd said, nose high, eyes half-lidded with boredom. The townsfolk, not particularly offended but very inventive, decided to prove him wrong in the most ridiculous way. The next year, they created a parade, not of nobles or warriors, but of slightly important individuals. The rules were specific. You could only join the parade if you could argue convincingly that you were important, but only a little. So came the cheese turner who had once saved an entire wheel of brie from mould, the woman who whistled so loudly she scared off crows during Mass, a man whose beard had been used as a paintbrush by a wandering artist. Children paraded their parents. Grandmothers rode wheelbarrows like chariots. Everyone wore costumes of half-earned glory, robes stitched from old curtains, crowns made of spoons, sceptres carved from stale breadsticks. A panel of mock judges declared prizes. Most humble bragger, least likely hero, and almost but not legendary. Laughter rolled through the streets like fog, softening the edges of pride and self-importance. Even the mayor was demoted to dignified assistant to the pretend king of dandelions. The duke never returned. But the parade did, every year. Each generation added new roles. The girl who once held her sneeze for a whole hour during her uncle's sermon. The man who taught goats to play dead. The baker who could identify every spice blindfolded, except cinnamon. It became a festival of human quirk. A celebration of those strange, in-between achievements too small for statues, but too lovely to forget. Not far from there, in a crumbling manor overtaken by vines and swallows, another game was said to take place, the banquet of imagined foods. Only the oldest families played it, though they invited outsiders from time to time. Guests would gather at a long table, velvet cloths laid smooth as glass and golden plates polished to reflection. But there was no food. Not a crumb, not a drop. Instead, each guest was required to describe their dish. Not with a name, but with a story. One might say, "Tonight I dine on the moon's third shadow, served with a whisper from my first heartbreak, and drizzled with the oil of a forgotten word." Another might reply, "Ah, excellent pairing. I've brought frosted echo with fried sunflower music on the side." It was performance, yes, but also art. The more vivid the description, the more delicious the pretend dish became in the minds of all present. Guests would moan with satisfaction, sigh dramatically, and debate whose imaginary meal best complemented the imaginary wine. By the end of the evening, they were full, not in the belly, but in the mind, filled with tastes that never existed, textures born only of metaphor. It was strange, it was elite, it was pure, unfiltered imagination. Once, a visiting poet tried to take notes during the banquet. He was kindly asked to stop. "It is meant to be forgotten," they told him, "like a flavour on the tip of the tongue when you wake from a dream." Still deeper into the countryside, in fog-drenched valleys where wild herbs overtook every path, villagers gathered for something more physical, the stumbling chase. It was a race, technically, but the participants had to run backward, while blindfolded and carrying a loaf of bread on their head. The goal? To reach the finish line first without dropping the bread or injuring oneself. The path was littered with gentle hazards, cushions, buckets of feathers, puddles of ink. The audience, lining the route, was allowed to shout misleading directions. "Left? No, your other left? Mind the goat." There was no goat. It was a chaos of falls, laughter, and occasional flurries of breadcrumbs. The winner received a crown made of oven mitts and a loaf of rye with their name burned into the crust. It may have seemed silly, but there was strategy. A family from one hilltop village trained all year by practicing with stacked apples on their heads. Another swore by balancing with knees slightly bent and muttering the name of a saint under their breath. No money changed hands. No official record was kept. But the stumbling chase was retold all year. In songs, in jokes, in flourished reenactments with walking sticks and laughter. And finally we drift to the far north, where the winters held tight and even the stars seemed slower. There, in candle-lit lodges carved from pine and stone, villagers told stories, but not aloud. They carved them. The carved lies, they called them. Each winter, when the snow sealed roads and silenced wolves, families would gather and choose one lie, one outrageous, unbelievable tale, and carve it into a single piece of wood over many nights, not in words, but in pictures, symbols, gestures etched deep into grain, a girl flying on a spoon over mountains, a man whose hair turned into worms, a fish that sang lullabies to sleeping bears. Each family added flourishes, swirls, marks of disbelief. It was understood that the carvings were false, but they were to be carved as if sacred. Come spring, the carvings were displayed. No explanation given. The villagers would study them and vote silently on the best lie. The winner earned the right to create next winter's truth carving, a small totem to be placed on the village's oldest tree. And so, the carved lies lived on, some still hidden in barns, others hung above hearths. Memory etched in grain, proof that even when the voice was still, the story found a way to speak. And in every tale, every ritual, every absurdity, from the nonsense banquets to the backward races, the people of those strange, shadowed centuries reached out to joy like it was something sacred. Because in a way it was. The early morning mist rises from the moors like the breath of some great slumbering beast, curling through the hollows, slipping past hedgerows and stone fences until it reaches a village just waking. And in that village, quiet, cloaked in dew, comes the soft rhythm of wooden wheels and the curious creak of springs. For today is the day of the rolling beds. Few festivals were as beloved or as absurd as this one. Long before dawn, families would haul their beds out into the street. Not just mattresses or straw pallets, but entire beds, posts, frames, blankets and all. These were not cast aside as trash. No, these were vehicles. For one glorious day each year, beds became chariots and sleep became a sport. The rules? Simple in theory, chaotic in practice. Each team had two participants, one rider and one runner. The runner would push the bed through a winding course mapped through the village's narrow lanes, up muddy hills, past the blacksmith's forge, through the market square, and, if the gods were cruel, around the duck pond. The rider's task was to remain perfectly still, eyes closed, hands folded, like a dreamer untouched by motion. If they twitched, if they peeked, if they so much as smiled, points were docked. It was called the Pilgrimage of the Sleepers. Villagers lined the streets, throwing flower petals and shouting blessings, both real and ridiculous. May your dreams outrun the chickens. Don't wake until the tavern reopens. Some families had generations of rolling bed champions. They built custom beds with hidden wheels, featherlight frames, and trick footboards that could double as steering rudders. Others simply dragged their grandmother's creaky oak frame, its posts splintered and noble like forgotten ships. And still others came only to laugh. To see the local priest nearly topple over while dressed in embroidered sheets, or the baker's son dressed as a snoring princess drooling into his father's best pillow. But beneath the silliness was a deeper meaning, a celebration of rest itself. In a world where waking life was toil and survival, where the sun dictated labour and the cold bit through even the thickest wool, sleep was one of the few realms untouched by hardship. To honour it, to parade it through the streets like a sovereign, was not so strange after all. Further north, where the wind howled through the thatch and the winters stretched long enough to fold the days into one another pastime took hold, the trial of the lanterns. Held on the coldest night of the year, this ritual was a test of both craft and courage. Each household would spend weeks, sometimes months, preparing their entry. A lantern built entirely by hand, no two alike. Some were made from thin leather stretched over whittled branches, others from dyed parchment, stitched silk, or dried animal bladders cured with resin. Inside, a single candle or ember would be placed, and once lit the lantern would be carried into the forest. But not just anywhere. There was a glade, ancient, half swallowed by fog and legends, where the villagers claimed the wandering ones passed through in the winter dark. Not spirits exactly, not demons either, just presences, quiet, curious. Participants would enter the glade one by one, carrying their lanterns, and leave them hanging from branches, antlers of frozen trees, or posts driven into the frostbitten ground. They were to say nothing, not even a whisper, then return, hands empty. The villagers waited. They drank hot wine, they told stories in low voices, and after an hour they returned to the glade. What they found was never the same. Sometimes the lanterns had been rearranged into perfect circles, spirals, or shapes no one recognised. Sometimes they had been extinguished, but the wax was still warm. A few times a lantern would be missing entirely, replaced by a carved stone or a bundle of pine needles tied with hair. Was it just mischief? Children playing tricks, perhaps, but no one ever admitted it, and the fear, the delicious, shivering kind that lives in the marrow, kept the game alive. Year after year, more lanterns were built. More villagers tiptoed into the night, wondering what unseen eyes watched their quiet offerings. To build a lantern was to create beauty in darkness. To leave it behind was to say, "Here is something I made. Take it if you must." Back in the cities, among clamour and crowded halls, another kind of game held sway. This one invisible, unheard, and entirely secret. They called it the compliment conspiracy. Born in merchant circles and spread like perfume through aristocratic salons, it was a challenge of subtlety and charm. The object was simple: to give the most outrageous, absurd, or artfully poetic compliment to someone, without them realising it was a compliment at all. One nobleman, for instance, once remarked to a rival, "Your presence is like a coat on fire, impossible to ignore, strangely comforting and somehow inappropriate in every room." The rival, not knowing whether to be flattered or insulted, responded only with a cautious bow. Another woman described a young suitor's voice as a lute dropped into a well and still trying bravely to sing. He thanked her, bewildered. Compliments had to be delivered in passing, during unrelated conversations. They could never be repeated or explained, and most importantly, the recipient could not laugh, or the compliment was considered wasted. At the end of the season, a secret vote would be held. Servants, scribes, even stable boys were allowed to cast ballots, anonymously selecting the crown of hidden praise. The winner received nothing but a knowing nod from others in the conspiracy, and perhaps a poem slipped beneath their door. It was a social ballet, half satire, half affection, a game of masks and meanings designed to challenge wit and protect the fragile egos of the highborn. In the lowlands, far from polished marble and candlelit banquets, simpler joys prevailed. One of them was the mud choir. After the first thaw of spring, when the fields turned to soup and boots sank ankle-deep in muck, the villagers would gather for what was both a contest and a catharsis. Wearing old clothes, flower crowns and bells, groups would assemble in the central field and sing. Not while standing, but while sinking. The goal was to perform the most beautiful, almost ridiculous, song while slowly descending into the mud. Harmony was applauded. Disharmony was adored. If someone tripped and face-planted into the muck mid-verse, the applause was deafening. People rehearsed for weeks. Songs were rewritten with verses like, "My love, you are the cleanest shoe, but I am just a puddle's hue." The winning team received a bar of soap carved into the shape of a lute and the dubious honour of washing everyone's clothes in the river. But the mud itself was the true prize. Children rolled in it like puppies. Elders watched from dry stumps, cackling and remembering their own glory days of muddy serenades. And in that squelching, slipping chaos, something pure emerged. The music of letting go. And somewhere, far across the hills and fog, in a village so small it barely appeared on maps, a different ritual took place. It was called simply the asking. On the longest day of summer, every child who had reached their 9th year was granted the right to ask one impossible question, aloud in front of the village. The rule was clear. It must be a question no one could answer. What colour is a thought? If the wind had a mother, would she live in the sky or the sea? Can a shadow remember being light? The elders listened. They did not laugh, they nodded, and then the question was carved into stone, not for answering, but for keeping. Each stone was placed in a ring at the edge of the village, a circle of questions growing with each generation. No one ever tried to answer them. That wasn't the point. The point was to wonder, to honour wonder itself, and in that wonder, strange though it may seem, joy was found. The morning dew still clings to the grass like fragments of glass, shimmering faintly as the village yawns into wakefulness. A soft breeze carries the scent of yeast and ash, the smell of bread, the smell of fire, and the sound a bell echoes once, twice, then fades. But this is no church bell. This is the call to gather for the game known only as the turning of the loaf. In this curious tradition, held only once every 7 years, the entire village participates in an elaborate game that blends baking, storytelling, and deception. It begins days in advance, when every household prepares a single loaf of bread. But these are not ordinary loaves, they are disguised. Some hide objects within: coins, buttons, herbs, even poems scrawled on scraps of parchment. Others are baked into strange shapes: a sleeping cat, a squatting gnome, a faceless king. The loaves are not meant to be eaten. Not yet. They are meant to be guessed. On the day of the turning, a long table is set in the village square, and the loaves are arranged like relics upon an altar. Each participant steps forward, selects a loaf not their own, and makes a proclamation about what lies within or what tale it tells. This one, a bearded weaver says, lifting a braided rye, was made by a widow who still dreams of her husband's laughter. Inside is a stone from the path they used to walk together. The real maker stands silent, revealing nothing. A child approaches a squat sourdough shaped like a frog. "This is no bread at all," she says, grinning. "It is a messenger from the mud spirits. If you eat it, you dream of rain." The crowd chuckles. Guesses are made. Some are wildly wrong, others eerily correct, but no one wins, no one loses. When all the loaves have been spoken for, the table is flipped, literally turned over, and the loaves broken open. Some contain nothing. Some contain everything. A baker once found a ring hidden in her own mother's loaf, a ring that had been lost for over a decade. Another time, a loaf shaped like a heart was discovered to contain a beetle carved from bone, alongside a note that read, "This is what it became." People wept. People laughed until their stomachs ached. People marvelled at the small, sacred foolishness of it all. In the evening, the remaining crumbs were swept into a single cloth, tied into a knot, and hung from the village's oldest tree. It was said that birds who ate those crumbs sang strange songs in the spring. Far to the west, in a village embraced by cliffs and cold winds, a quieter ritual was unfolding, one that spoke not through words or laughter, but through shadow. The night of the long silhouettes was not for the faint-hearted. It was held only in winters when the moon was at its slimmest, when the night was darkest, and when the snow lay untouched like blank parchment. The villagers would gather in a wide clearing, each holding a thin carved candle holder. The candles, hand-dipped and mixed with salt to burn slower, were placed in a perfect circle. Then, one by one, participants stepped into the centre of the ring, their bodies illuminated only by the flickering candlelight, casting long silhouettes across the snow. They were not allowed to speak, not allowed to move quickly. They could only pose slowly, deliberately, holding a shape for as long as the wax allowed. Some posed as creatures, a bear, a snake, a winged thing from a child's dream. Others took human forms, a grieving mother, a laughing fool, a man pulling an invisible rope. And some were simply still, arms raised or bent backward, their shadows stretched across the snow like reaching spirits. The others watched in reverence, guessing not the identity of the person, but the story of the shadow, that someone who lost a brother. A woman might whisper. "No," said another. "That's a fisherman dancing with death." When the final candle sputtered, the ring was broken. No one clapped. No one bowed. They walked home in silence. Children later reenacted the poses in their play. Elders remembered certain silhouettes for years, as if they were dreams they could almost explain. And deep in the cold earth, the snow kept the impressions, faint dips and ridges where feet had pressed meaning into the night. In the warmer lands, where olive groves swayed under slow-moving clouds and cicadas stitched the air with sound, people found delight in a different kind of performance. It was called the Library of Spoken Books, and it took place in groves rather than buildings, among stone benches and tangled vines. There were no shelves, no parchment, no ink. Instead, each book was a person, someone who had memorized a story or a letter or even a recipe so old no one could remember who first cooked it. These human books sat quietly until a visitor approached, knelt beside them, and gently tapped twice on their shoulder. "Open, please." The book would smile, close their eyes and begin. Sometimes it was a tale of love, whispered softly with pauses and sighs. Other times, a saga of mischief, with voices and laughter. There were books of heartbreak, of childhood, of ghosts and geese and fields that sang. Some books could only be opened at dusk, others at sunrise. One man claimed he was a book of nothing, and when tapped, he simply sat in silence, still, serene, eyes like wells. It was considered rude to interrupt. Visitors listened until the story ended, then offered a flower, a fruit, or a word in thanks. The stories were never written down. That was the rule. They existed only in memory, shared like bread, one slice at a time, until it was gone. And when a book died, their story was sometimes taken up by another, or sometimes it vanished, like a page never printed, like a song hummed once and never again. Further east, in the foothills where thunder rolled lazily across the sky and rivers curled like ink on parchment, the children invented a game that grew to become a beloved rite: the Echo Wedding. It began as a joke, a pretend wedding between two frogs found in a watering hole. But something about it captured the imagination of the village. Soon, children began arranging weddings between anything that made a sound: two dogs barking across a fence, a creaking gate and a howling wind, the clang of a pot and the whistle of a boiling kettle. The wedding had to be accompanied by witnesses, usually sticks dressed in leaves, and the vows were spoken in rhyme. If bark and breeze do choose to wed, then let them dance until they're dead. If clank and cry should make a pair, may laughter ring out through the air. Adults began to take part. Farmers paused in their work to officiate a union between thunder and a rooster's call. A blacksmith once threw a full banquet, complete with apple cider and candied chestnuts, to celebrate the marriage of a cracked bell and the toll of the village clock. People laughed, but always gently. It became tradition. When something odd happened, a goat bleated in perfect harmony with the closing door, or a raven cawed just as a milkmaid sneezed. Someone would cry, "Another Echo Wedding," and the village would smile. And so, even in a time of toil and dust and duty, the world rang with the sound of pretend unions and impossible music, and joy, strange as it was, sang on. A soft fog clings to the rooftops, tender as wool, and the sky is the colour of worn linen, pale, quiet, expectant. Beneath this hush, the village begins to stir, not with the clang of tools or the murmurs of prayer, but with the distant, rhythmic thump of something. Rolling. It is the day of the travelling chairs. No one knows exactly how it began. Some say it was sparked by a carpenter who built a chair so comfortable he refused to ever leave it, so his family simply wheeled him through the streets to be part of daily life. Others claim it started with a joke among tailors, eager to outdo each other in the creation of the most elaborate seat imaginable. Whatever the origin, once a year the village comes alive with chairs that move, chairs that dance, chairs that speak without words. The rules are peculiar. Every household must design one chair. It can be fashioned from anything, woven reeds, old door frames, driftwood from the river's bend, but it must be able to roll, and it must have a personality. Some are shaped like thrones, their arms wrapped in ivy and brass. Others are squat, absurd little contraptions with wheels made of cheese moulds or barrel lids. One memorable year, a family arrived with a chair balanced on stilts and carried like a royal litter by 4 reluctant goats. But the true joy of the event lies not in the construction, but in the storytelling. Each participant must push their chair slowly through the village, all while narrating, in character, the life of the chair. "This is Dame Petunia," one man says solemnly, gesturing to a lavender seat with a velvet cushion and a parasol affixed to the back. "She once served tea to the Queen of Clouds and hasn't sat on dirt since." Another child introduces a broken 3-legged stool. "His name is Tumble," she says with pride. "He only dreams of balance, but he's terribly shy around tables." The village listens, they nod, they applaud. At the end of the procession, the chairs are gathered in a circle on the green. For the rest of the day, anyone may sit in any chair, but they must speak as the chair while seated. Whole conversations bloom between furniture. A bar stool flirts with a rocking chair, while a pew whispers complaints about posture to a stool made of bones and moss. At sunset, the chairs are carried to the river and set afloat with candles resting gently on their seats. Some tip immediately and vanish with a splash. Others drift for hours, slowly spinning like tired dancers. It is said that if your chair sinks without a sound, your next dream will bring you an answer to a question you didn't know you were asking. Across the hills, in a village wrapped in vineyards and steeped in sun, a different kind of performance unfolds as twilight gathers. This is The Theatre of the Lost Lines, a play performed once a year entirely in forgotten dialogue. It begins with a script, or rather the memory of one. Actors, usually villagers in simple robes and hand-painted masks, take the stage in the old barn, which still smells of hay and fermented apples. They begin with the first line of a story told decades ago, a tale once known but now mostly forgotten. The prince awoke beneath the field of bells, and from there, nothing is written. Each performer must invent their lines based only on gestures from the others and fragments of stories half remembered from childhood. No one rehearses. No one speaks out of turn. The audience sits in complete silence, watching as a narrative rises like mist from uncertainty. One year it became a tale of a knight who could only speak in the language of bees. Another, a merchant who traded shadows instead of goods. Sometimes the story collapses entirely, descending into chaos, laughter, movement, the sound of hands clapping in strange rhythms. But when the performers leave the stage, a bell is rung. The audience is then asked to write down what they think the play was about. Each version is different, 100 interpretations, 100 truths. These interpretations are gathered in a great black book with no title, kept locked in the village hall. No one may read from it until the reader themselves has performed. The idea is simple. You must first invent mystery before being allowed to understand another's. And so stories live and shift like firelight on old walls, never fixed, never wrong. Back in the east, in a quiet valley where the trees lean like eavesdropping grandmothers, a more delicate game plays out under the petals of cherry and plum trees. It is known simply as the Whisper Market. No coin is exchanged here, no bartering, no loud haggling, only whispers. Stalls are arranged like secrets, small, shaded nooks decorated with cloth, bone or dried flowers. Vendors sell curious things: a bottle of last Thursday's breeze, a slice of invisible cake, a jar that rattles when angry. Each item comes with a name, never a price. To purchase something, the buyer must lean in and whisper why they need it, not what they will pay, but why they desire it. I need this spoon because I miss my grandfather's laugh. I want this key because I once locked away a version of myself I'm now ready to meet. The vendor decides silently whether the reason is worthy. If so, the item is handed over, and a single thread is tied to the buyer's wrist. No one cuts the thread. They must wear it until it falls off naturally, a sign that the trade has completed its journey. Sometimes buyers leave without a word, empty-handed but smiling. Other times, they cry upon receiving something they didn't know they needed. And sometimes someone walks away with nothing visible at all, just a whisper heavier in their chest. At night, the whisper market disappears. Not packed away, not closed, just gone. And in the morning the fields return untouched, as if the market had been a shared dream. Farther still, where the forests breathe with the slow rhythm of untouched centuries, there lies a hidden village known only to those who've once been lost. And here, once a decade, takes place perhaps the strangest festival of them all, the ceremony of unfinished songs. There is no date for it. It happens when it is ready, or perhaps when enough songs remain undone. In the days leading up to the ceremony, villagers submit fragments. A verse hummed by a dying mother, a chorus forgotten mid-lullaby, a melody that once came in a dream but vanished by morning. These pieces are drawn from a box at random, and musicians, self-taught, unsure, trembling, must attempt to complete them, not to finish them correctly, for there is no correctness, but to offer a new ending, a possible path. The new songs are performed one after another beneath the ancient yew tree. Some are joyous, some painful, some so quiet they can barely be heard over the wind. No applause is given, no recordings are made. Instead, after each performance, the listeners place stones at the base of the tree. Large ones for songs that stirred them, small ones for those they're not ready to understand. By morning, the pile becomes a cairn. By evening, it is gone. Some say the tree swallows the stones, digesting them like stories. Others believe villagers take them one by one to place beside their beds as reminders of the songs they didn't know they needed. And so it is that in shadows, in silence, in strangeness, the Middle Ages became not just a time of survival, but a time of subtle rebellions against despair. With every invented market, with every whisper transaction and rolling chair, people created little sanctuaries of imagination, and in those sacred absurdities they remembered what it meant to be human. The morning comes heavy with mist curling around chimney tops and resting low along the cobbled lanes like a cat unwilling to stir. Yet beneath the fog, something playful is unfolding. In the heart of a sleepy hamlet tucked between fields of barley and heather, men and women tiptoe about with pockets full of stones, smooth, flat, and cool to the touch. Today is the festival of accusations, and for the next few hours, truth will bend beneath the weight of mischief and invention. It begins without a word. There are no trumpets, no banners, only the quiet thrill of secrecy as villagers slip stones into each other's baskets, boots and aprons, marking them symbolically with a silent charge. The stones are tokens of blame, not heavy enough to hurt, just enough to accuse. But of what? That's the game. Once the sun has crested the trees, the accused are gathered in the square, where an old wooden barrel sits atop a dais, the barrel of tales. The mayor, or the eldest villager, presides as judge, draped in a robe stitched with every colour imaginable, and wearing a crown made of carrots, radishes, and garlic cloves. The vegetables are always fresh, always ridiculous, and always stolen from unsuspecting gardens the night before. Each stone is read aloud, not by name, but by where it was found. A stone was discovered in the left boot of the blacksmith's apprentice. What say the village? The crowd erupts with guesses. He was seen whispering to a chicken after sunset. He painted a moustache on the statue of Saint Wilma. He brews love potions that only work on geese. No proof is needed. The more outrageous the accusation, the better. The accused must respond not with denial, but with a counter-story, something to explain the behaviour, to turn the ridiculous into legend. Yes, the apprentice might say solemnly, I did whisper to the chicken, but only because she holds the secret of my father's name, which he forgot on a Tuesday long ago. The villagers vote by applause. If the story is convincing, the accused is declared joyfully guilty and paraded through the streets with cheers and confetti made of onion skins. If the tale falls flat, they must spin the barrel of tales. A large cylinder filled with absurd tasks, serenading a scarecrow, reenacting the story of their accusation with puppets, or composing a 3-line poem about socks. By sundown, the square is filled with laughter, chalk drawings, and exaggerated confessions. No one is truly punished, no one leaves ashamed. It is a festival of make-believe accountability, a shared indulgence in the art of the tall tale, a way to point fingers not in judgment, but in jest, to remember that storytelling, like justice, is often more about performance than proof. Far beyond this village, across the mountains where clouds drift low and sheep roam like whispers across the hills, another peculiar practice survives in the cliffside settlements. A ritual of solitude observed in silence and shadow, known as the listening hour. This is not a holiday. It is not a performance. It is a gift one gives a stranger, without being asked. At dusk, on the final Sunday of every month, villagers place a single white stone on the doorstep of someone they believe has a story to tell. That person, upon finding the stone, knows that they are invited to speak, uninterrupted, unquestioned, for exactly 1 hour. The listener must not respond, not even with a nod. The speaker chooses the place: a bench beneath the old linden tree, the edge of the stream, the church steps, the ruined tower that no longer holds its bell. And once the hour begins, the speaker pours out whatever they wish. A memory, a regret, a half-formed dream, a confession meant for no one, a sorrow too soft to name. The listener simply listens, fully, kindly, quietly. It is said that the power of the ritual lies not in being heard, but in being seen, in knowing that for 1 hour, someone chooses to carry your story like a secret folded in their hands. No names are written, no records kept. But each village tracks the hour with stones placed in a spiral pattern near the churchyard. 1 stone for each story told. By now, the spiral stretches deep into the grass, where even children tread lightly. It is custom for each listener to leave a token afterward, not for the speaker, but for the wind. A dried flower, a pinch of salt, a song hummed with no words. And thus, the listening hour endures. A strange, quiet dance between vulnerability and witness, an act of sacred stillness in a world always clamouring to be louder. Elsewhere, in coastal towns, where sails flap like wings above the harbours and gulls cry into the wind, another unusual ritual blooms each spring: the telling of the drowned names. This ceremony is not for grief, though it was born from it. It is for remembering the names of those who never returned from sea, and for giving names to those who never had one. Fishermen and their families gather by the water's edge at twilight. In their hands, they carry paper boats, tiny things folded from old letters, song sheets, market flyers, or the corners of storybooks. Each boat bears a name written in ink made of squid dye and wine. Some names are real: Mathis of the North Wind, Elena of the Iron Nets. Others are imagined: the one who whistled to storms, the boy who dreamed of dolphins. Each boat is placed gently in the shallows and pushed out with a whispered blessing. Some drift far, some sink immediately. A few circle back as if uncertain whether to stay or go. But no matter what the boat does, the name is spoken aloud. Loud enough to carry, soft enough to tremble. There are rules. No name may be repeated 2 years in a row. No name may belong to the living, and no one may name themselves. Afterward, villagers warm themselves with salt bread and cups of rosemary tea. No one speaks of who was real. That is not the point. It is not remembrance of fact, but remembrance of possibility, of stories half finished, of lives perhaps imagined but no less worthy of being whispered into the sea. The following morning, children walk the shore to collect the boats that remain. These they keep in boxes beneath their beds or hang from their windows like talismans. One girl claimed her boat sang to her in dreams. Another swore her boat changed names each night. No one questioned them. For in this place, imagination is never corrected, only cradled. And in the highlands, where winds tear through heather and crows gossip from moss-covered stones, another game lives on. One of wildness, of surrender, of joyful surrender to the absurd. It is known simply as the 3-day lie. It begins at dusk on the first day of harvest. Every adult in the village is given a red ribbon. This ribbon, once worn, grants the bearer a singular freedom. For the next 3 days they may lie, outrageously, beautifully, impossibly, and no one may contradict them. I am the queen of the moon's garden, one might declare, tying the ribbon to her braid. I once rode a whale made of smoke and stole stars from its eyes. Another says, I was born as a horse, cursed into this form by an envious broomstick. Even the most stoic of farmers, normally silent as fence posts, will claim he once held hands with the sun and taught it to rise in the east. The lies are not cruel. They are never spiteful. They are performances, declarations of identity untethered from fact. During these days, truth becomes secondary. Children listen wide-eyed. Elders giggle into their soup. New romances often bloom, founded not on who someone is, but who they might dare to be for a little while. At the end of the 3rd day, a bell rings. The lies must end. The ribbons are burned. But something remains in the air, a softness, a permission, a reminder that truth is not always what binds us. Sometimes it is the lie, the shared pretending, the collective suspension that teaches us more about what we long to believe. And so, in every stone hidden in a boot, in every whisper heard beneath a tree, in every paper boat that sails on borrowed names, the medieval world sings its strangest lullaby, a song not of power or war, but of wonder. The moon sits low tonight, round and golden like an overripe pear, casting long shadows across the fields. Somewhere, a dog barks once, and then the night settles again, folding gently over rooftops and pastures like a quilt of silence. But not all is still. For in a village nestled between winding rivers and silver birch groves, soft lanterns flicker to life, their glow revealing curious figures in cloaks made of patchwork and parchment. It is the eve of the Great Forgetting. This peculiar festival, celebrated once every decade, is not a celebration of memory but of its deliberate abandonment. For one single evening, the villagers choose to unremember. Not all things, not the sacred or the necessary, but just enough to make the heart feel lighter and the world, if only for a few hours, utterly new. The ritual begins with a procession of the scribes of unknowing. These are not true scribes, though they carry long quills and wear spectacles with empty lenses. They are chosen at random, often by lottery or whim, and dressed in robes stitched from old book pages, scraps of forgotten recipes, torn bits of love letters and tax records, all sewn into a fluttering, crinkling garment that rustles like dry leaves when they walk. Each scribe carries a scroll, blank on one side, written on the other, not to read, but to erase. As the villagers gather in the square, a great parchment banner is unfurled between 2 sycamore trees. Upon it, in ink made from soot and blackberry wine, are written memories submitted in secret by the villagers in the weeks leading up to the festival. Some are heavy. The last words I said to my brother, the year I feared I would starve. Others are stranger. The time I believed my reflection was plotting against me. The smell of the soup I ruined during the bishop's visit. And a few are small, fragile, trivial, the name of my first pet beetle, how to tie a sailor's knot, the path to the old mill before the trees grew over it. With quiet reverence, the scribes step forward and begin to wash the memories from the parchment using soft cloths dipped in rosewater and ash. The ink bleeds and fades, the lines vanishing beneath gentle circles until the banner becomes pale and unreadable, a sky of ghosts. Then comes the dance. It is not a dance of joy or sorrow. It is a dance of drifting, slow steps, long arms, heads tilted back as if watching invisible stars. No music plays, only the sound of wind and breath and the rustle of the memory robes. Participants wear masks made of woven straw or bark. Some wear bells on their wrists that chime only when they move too quickly. The idea is to forget not only stories but also speed, pressure, even identity. To become, for a few hours, something untethered. Children watching from the edges are told the same story every time. If you forget well tonight, their parents whisper, you might dream of your next self. And so the square fills with movement, like a tide that never crashes, only sways. At midnight, the lanterns are dimmed and silence returns. Everyone walks home slowly, speaking little, letting the absence settle in. No one records the festival, no drawings are made. The next morning, the scribes burn their scrolls, robes, and quills. Only the blank banner remains, gently folded and stored until the next decade. It is not about erasure, it is about release. And in that release, laughter often rises, quiet, unexpected, pure. Meanwhile, in the stony uplands where cliffs drop into mist and sheep graze among ancient cairns, a much louder ritual takes place, the shouting of names. This is not a festival of forgetting, quite the opposite. It is a noisy, joyful reclaiming of identity, of lineage, of echoes. It begins at dawn with the waking of the stones. In a windswept field stands a semicircle of towering boulders older than memory. Each has been given a name by the villagers, not grand names but familiar ones. Agnes Rock, Crooked Tom, Auntie Elspeth, Hungry Stone, Baby Meg. On this morning, families gather before them and shout. They shout their own names. They shout names of ancestors long past. They shout names of animals, lost friends, favourite childhood toys, forgotten rivers, secret places. I am Thomas, son of the laughing baker. I name the chicken who saved my father's life. I call the wind that carried my sister's scarf. Children run between the stones, spinning, yelling names into cupped hands, their voices bouncing back in garbled, joyous fragments. Elders stand with their faces turned to the sun, whispering names that no one else remembers, names that only they could carry. Each shouted name is considered a gift. To the stones, to the sky, to time itself. By midday, the field is thick with echoes. Some swear the rocks themselves hum. Others claim the birds sing louder on this day, as if adding their own names to the cacophony. A single rule is observed. You may not shout your own name twice. To do so is to trap it, they say, to freeze it like frost on grass. One must let the name go after it's been spoken, so that the wind may take it to wherever such things go, to the dreams of trees, perhaps, or the ears of ancestors listening from rain. At the end of the shouting, villagers gather their breath and sing a soft droning chant in unison. No words, just vowels, to quiet the stones again. It is a strange, stirring thing to be so loud and then so quiet, to give voice and then give space. Elsewhere, tucked behind waterfalls and fern-choked paths, a hidden community observes one of the most curious forms of amusement the medieval world ever whispered into being. They call it the game of borrowed eyes. It is played not with dice, nor with cards, but with masks. Dozens of them, carved from wood, leather and bone, each representing a different eye. Not just physical sight, but ways of seeing the world. The eye of sorrow, a mask with weeping grooves down its cheeks. The eye of mirth, painted with flowers and wide, laughing lids. The eye of doubt, the eye of rain, the eye of the wolf, the eye of the fool, the eye of sleep. Participants enter the game by choosing a mask at random from a cloth-covered table. Once worn, they must embody the perspective of that eye for the rest of the evening. If you draw the eye of rain, you must speak in metaphors and finish every sentence with a question. If you wear the eye of the fool, you must pretend not to understand anything, even the shape of your own hands. If you wear the eye of sleep, you must move slowly, as if dreaming, and answer all questions with the word perhaps. Throughout the evening, villagers interact, negotiate, dance, and debate through these personas. New alliances form. Long-held grudges are forgotten, or sometimes reversed. Stories are told with meanings inverted. One might say, through the eye of doubt, I see that our fence is not a wall, but a bridge yet unfinished. Or, with the eye of mirth, your silence becomes a song. It is not role-play for amusement. It is transformation through constraint, a loosening of self by stepping into another's way of seeing. At the end of the night, the masks are returned. Each person writes a single sentence about what they learned and buries it in the forest. A child once wrote, "The eye of sleep taught me to wait." An old woman buried, "The eye of sorrow made me forgive my shadow." And so, across these strange lands, through rituals loud and quiet, through games of forgetting and shouting and seeing through borrowed sight, the people of the Middle Ages revealed themselves not as humorless or harsh, but as dreamers ever searching for meaning in the cracks between days. Not in books, but in play. The night rolls in on velvet paws, slow and soundless, painting the horizon in ink and coal. A crescent moon hangs like a blade above the trees, and somewhere in the distance an owl calls once, twice, then disappears into the hush. But in a secluded glade surrounded by leaning willows and fox-gloved hollows, light flickers, Not firelight, but a soft glimmering green, and in that strange shimmering glow, figures move like phantoms. They are the participants of the ceremony of the false forest. Once a year, when the moon is at its most delicate and the air so still it seems to hum, a community gathers to recreate the forest, not with branches and leaves, but with themselves. Each person becomes a tree. The rules are passed down like song, quiet, reverent, never written. You may not speak. You must arrive dressed in silence, wearing garments of moss, bark, feathers, or straw. Your face must be obscured, your hands painted with ash. You may bring one sound, the rustle of grain, the whistle of a reed, the soft tap of carved wood, and you must stand rooted. Scattered throughout the meadow, villagers plant themselves into the earth like sentinels. Some stand tall and swaying, their arms rising in slow arcs like birch limbs. Others crouch low and twisted, mimicking the gnarled elder trees by the marsh. A few lie across log or hang from branches like tangled ivy or creeping vines. Each person chooses their tree not by appearance, but by feeling. There are those who become the sad willow, drooping toward the earth in endless mourning. Others take the shape of the laughing elm, arms raised and bent in a posture of permanent mirth. There is the tree that waits, the tree that remembers, the tree that regrets. As the forest fills, something begins to shift. The glade becomes quiet, deeply, unnaturally quiet, as if the land itself is listening. The wind changes, the birds vanish, and then the children enter. They are barefoot and blindfolded, guided into the glade one by one, each carrying a bell. Their task is simple, to find the tree that speaks to them, not in voice but in silence. They walk slowly, their hands reaching, their heads tilted. They pause before each person tree, listening not with ears, but with something older. And when they find their tree, they ring their bell and sit beneath it. Once all bells have rung, the adults remain still for 1 more hour. No one moves, no one speaks. Some say the earth breathes differently during this hour, that foxes stop to watch, that stars blink more slowly above the glade. And when the hour ends, the children remove their blindfolds and look around. Truly look. For the first time, they see which tree they chose, which person stood still for them, which silent presence offered comfort, protection, or recognition. It is a ritual not of games, but of understanding. Afterward, the glade empties. The villagers return to their homes, scraping bark from their arms, brushing feathers from their shoulders, washing the silence from their skin. But something remains. Children speak of the trees they'll never forget. Adults carry aching knees and full hearts, and the forest, the real one beyond the glade, seems to lean a little closer for days afterward, as if grateful for being mirrored. Far away, in a salt-kissed village built on stilts and laughter, another game is played. One far louder and far stranger. It is known as the Tournament of the Ridiculous Hats. At first glance, it may seem like nothing more than a costume contest, but to call it such would be to miss its true purpose. A wild, unspoken challenge to the seriousness of survival itself. Each year, villagers compete to craft and wear the most astonishing, absurd, impractical hat imaginable. There are only 2 rules. The hat must be wearable for an entire day, and it must tell a story, without words. The competition begins at dawn with a ceremonial donning of the hats on the tidewalk, a long wooden path stretching above the marshes. The hats wobble, shimmer, clatter and bounce in the golden light. One year, a fisherman wore a hat made of spinning wheels and dried squid, each tentacle curled to form verses of a poem only he could recite in motion. Another time, a blacksmith entered wearing a hat that was a functioning cuckoo clock, complete with a tiny metal bird that popped out and insulted passers-by in rhymed couplets. There have been hats made of cheese, hats that sprouted mushrooms, hats shaped like miniature taverns with working lanterns and swinging doors, hats that changed colour when you blinked. But it is the story that matters. When asked, the wearer must bow deeply and explain their creation in pantomime alone. A graceful swirl of the hand, a stomp, a whistle, a mime of a lost shoe. The villagers guess. The laughter rises, a bell rings each hour. The hats must be judged anew by a rotating council of children who take their roles with fierce gravity. At sundown, the hat voted most necessary nonsense is placed on a velvet cushion and floated out to sea in a tiny boat lit with candles. Should the boat return, driven by tide or trick of wind, The hat is considered chosen by the Sea of Silliness itself and preserved for another year in the Hall of Odd Things. No one is crowned. No one wins gold. The prize is being remembered. And to be remembered in such a way, as a joyful fool, a beautiful absurdity, is considered the highest honour of all. In the forests farther north, where snow stays long into spring and wolves are respected like cousins, another game unfolds in the stillness of night. It is called the hiding of the names. It begins with a fire, a large one, built in the centre of a clearing with pine logs and dried lichen. Around it, villagers gather, dressed in cloaks made of mismatched fabrics, each patch sewn with a single word. But no one speaks their true name. For the entire night, everyone is known only by the word on their cloak. Thimble, shiver, kite, silence. The names are chosen not by self, but drawn at random from a bag woven with moon thread. Once drawn, they are worn. They are lived. During the fire's burning, each person must complete one task. A song, a dance, a secret told as fiction, a riddle with no answer. Each performance is offered to the fire, to the night, to the name. If the group believes the task honoured the name well, they cheer. If not, they speak as one. Hide again. Then the person must leave the circle, wander into the woods for a time, and return with something, a stone, a feather, a bundle of moss, that somehow redefines the name they were given. This game is not about trickery or talent. It is about reflection, imagination. The way a name, even a false one, can change how we move, how we feel, how we remember ourselves. By morning, the names are burned in the fire. No one speaks of what they were, but often someone, days or weeks later, will call another not by their real name, but by the one they wore. Thank you, Thimble. Take care, Shiver. And something inside both speaker and listener will smile, remembering who they were just for that night. Through these games, wild, silent, hilarious, or reverent, the medieval spirit reveals itself once more. Not in thrones or treaties, but in strange rituals, in whispers between trees, in feathers glued to absurd hats and names drawn from darkness. It is not history we uncover, it is humanity, in all its beautiful, bewildering play. The stars tonight are sharp and clear, as if someone polished them just before dusk. They shimmer above the narrow ridges of the hills like scattered coins, glinting with silent promise. In the valley below, the world sleeps, doors latched, hearths dimmed, dogs curled beneath wooden tables. But in a small village tucked beneath the elbow of a slow-moving river, people are slipping quietly from their homes, carrying baskets filled not with food or offerings, but with riddles. This is the gathering of the unanswered questions. Unlike most festivals, this one holds no music, no games, no feast. It begins with stillness, as participants lay down their baskets at the centre of a wide, worn clearing just past the elder tree beneath the night sky. In each basket lies a question, one that has haunted the asker for months, years, sometimes a lifetime. These are not questions of crops or coin, but deeper things, quiet, trembling things. Why did my mother always sing to the storm? Did my brother see the same stars I see now when he left? What part of me will remain when my name is forgotten? The questions are written on scraps of linen, bark or parchment, then wrapped in cloth scented with lavender or pine resin and tied with twine. No names are included. No explanations. Once all baskets have been placed, the villagers sit in a wide circle. And then, one by one, they choose a basket that is not their own. What follows is the most sacred part of the night, the answering. But it is not an answer of fact. No one claims to know. Instead, each person offers a reply in the form of a story or a song or a carved object or even a dance. Some build a tiny sculpture of twigs and river glass. Others recite a poem they invented on the spot. One year, an old man simply released a bird he had raised from a hatchling. It was his answer, and no one questioned it. After the reply is given, the original asker retrieves the basket and their question and buries both beneath the roots of the elder tree. There the questions sleep, the tree remembers, and no one ever speaks of the answers again. The villagers say the tree grows crooked because it bends under the weight of all those secrets. But perhaps it bends because it's listening. Far away, in a land where the soil is soft and red and the cliffs breathe wind through their bones, another ritual unfolds. One so strange, so wonderfully peculiar, that even those who take part can never quite explain its purpose. It is called the Procession of the Hungry Shoes. It begins with a lie, a gentle, knowing lie told by one villager to another. "My shoes have started following me." This phrase signals the start. The other replies, "Then you must let them lead." And so begins the procession. Each villager chooses a pair of old shoes, not necessarily their own, and fills them with something unexpected: petals, birdseed, coins, dried pasta, buttons, dust. Then at dusk, they place the shoes at the edge of the village road and walk away. They must not look back. For the next 3 nights, the shoes move. That is to say, under cover of darkness, each person chooses someone else's shoes to quietly relocate. Sometimes by only a few feet, sometimes into a tree, sometimes into the village well, or hanging from a laundry line, or tucked neatly inside someone's window. Each new placement is meant to tell a story, to reveal a hunger. Shoes filled with birdseed left in the rafters, a longing to fly, a desire for freedom. Coins at the base of the church altar, a plea for forgiveness, a single wilted flower at the entrance to the bakery, perhaps an apology, or a memory, or nothing at all. No one admits to their movements. No one guards their shoes. By the end of the 3rd night, the village is transformed. Paths littered with displaced footwear, messages coded in placement and contents. The final morning, each person must walk the road and find a pair of shoes they did not bring. These they keep for the year, wearing them at home during the quietest hours. They call them their hunger slippers, and when someone visits and sees a pair on another's feet, they do not ask why. They simply say, "I see your shoes still wander." In another corner of the world, perched high where mist curls through the heather like smoke through lace, a different tradition thrives. Quieter, but no less strange. It is known as the mirrorless masquerade. The entire village, from babes to elders, spends a full day and night avoiding their own reflection. No mirrors, no still water, no polished brass. Faces are smeared with charcoal or chalk, noses painted red, ears adorned with mismatched feathers. Each person creates a disguise not to conceal, but to confuse, to trick their own eyes, should they happen to catch their reflection by accident. And yet, the heart of the masquerade lies in the games played throughout the day, games of identity. A child may run to their father and cry, "Who are you, Fox-face?" And the father, grinning through a mask of mud and moss, replies, "I'm the one you nearly became, had you taken the other path by the river." Friends greet one another with riddles. Are you the baker or the ghost of her dream of flour? Are you yourself or just your shadow on a playful day? No answers are true, and yet none are false. The masquerade allows for reinvention, for mischief, for memory to bend and reshape, just as a face might shift in rippling water. At nightfall, everyone gathers around the well. A mirror hidden beneath velvet is revealed. One by one, villagers step forward, remove their masks, and gaze into their reflection, not to judge but to reunite. No one speaks during this moment. Some cry, others laugh, many simply sigh. They say it is like meeting yourself again after a long, peculiar journey, a journey through absurdity, through play, through becoming, unbecoming, and becoming again. And finally, in the long plains beneath the old moon, in a place where time seems slower and wind carries the scent of wheat and wood smoke, we find the gentlest ritual of all. It is called the passing of the invisible gift. It can begin at any time, in any season. It requires no setup, no gathering, no rules, only intention. One person wakes and decides to pass it on, the invisible gift. A gift that cannot be seen, held, or named. They choose someone in the village, anyone, a neighbour, a stranger, a child, a shepherd. They do something quiet, something small. Perhaps they leave a door unlatched when they normally wouldn't, just in case the other wants to visit. Perhaps they hum a tune near the open window of the recipient's home. Perhaps they place a flower, a thread, or a warm stone on their doorstep and walk away before it is found. And they think, "I have given it." That night, the recipient may or may not know. They may feel it in the softness of their dream, in the echo of a forgotten laugh, in the peace of walking a familiar path that suddenly feels strange and good. When they wake, they too are allowed to pass it on, and so it spreads, sometimes slowly, sometimes like fire, until the entire village feels lighter, though no one can say why. No one speaks of it. No one claims it. It is the invisible game, the quietest joy, and it endures, not in memory, but in the spaces between footsteps, between glances, between the questions we don't ask and the answers we give anyway. These too were the games of the medieval soul, not the tournaments sung in songbooks, not the battles written into ledgers, but the strange, small amusements born of wariness, wonder, and the timeless desire to make life shimmer just a little, if only for a while. The sky this morning is streaked with the colour of old parchment, yellowed at the edges, soft with grey. The breeze carries the scent of baked earth and the distant murmur of a horn, low and wavering, as though blown by someone unsure whether to summon or simply remember. In the heart of the village square, beneath a tree that has forgotten its age, stands a crooked table surrounded by scrolls and wooden sticks carved with curious runes. At first glance, one might mistake this for a scholar's clutter or the remains of some unfinished craft. But today is no ordinary day. Today marks the return of the trial of the honest liars. Once every few years, never on the same date, never by formal announcement, this event is whispered into being when enough people agree silently that they are ready. Ready to tell the truth through lies. Ready to compete, not with fists or fortune, but with fictions so convincing, so haunting, that they become their own kind of truth. The rules are simple. Each participant arrives with a tale, a personal one, a confession, they say, though everyone understands the word is a costume here, not a sentence. It must begin with the words, "What I'm about to tell you is true, though none will believe it." Then the performance begins. A girl no older than 12 stands on the table first. Her voice is clear. "When I was born," she says, "my cry shattered a jar of honey on the other side of the village. The bees have whispered to me ever since. They tell me when to run and when to wait." No one laughs. A few nod. Next, a man with silver in his beard and sadness in his shoulders. "I once loved a woman made of fog. She came only when the river wept. We built a house of whispers. I still sleep in it." The audience listens. Each tale, though ridiculous, carries something tender, a reflection, a regret, a hope wrapped in absurdity. Some stories are joyous. I befriended the wind by naming it after my sister. It carries my prayers like secrets between branches. Some are painful. My mother grew smaller each year from sorrow. By the end, I wore her as a brooch. The villagers do not judge the tales by logic, but by resonance. If the story stirs something, if someone's chest tightens or they remember a dream they didn't know they had, they tie a coloured ribbon to a staff in the centre of the square. Each ribbon represents a wound touched, a smile earned, a heart made briefly less heavy. At the end of the day, the person with the most ribbons is declared the most honest liar. They are carried through the village in silence, not cheered but quietly honoured. Their tale is written in charcoal on the inside of a cupboard door in the town hall, never to be read, only preserved. Years later, if someone opens that door and runs their hand over the faded letters, they may feel something strange, a warmth, a whisper, the softest nudge toward a forgotten truth dressed as a lie. Not far from this village, in a realm where hills roll like waves and the sky always seems just 1 inch too close, another tradition emerges, one spun from cloth and curiosity. It is known as the cloak exchange. Once a year, every villager must surrender their cloak, the one they wear every day, whether plain or painted, patched or pristine. Cloaks are gathered at dawn and brought to the central green, where they are hung from ropes between trees, dancing like ghosts in the morning wind. Then begins the choosing. Each person in turn must pick a cloak that is not their own, with no knowledge of whose it is, and wear it for a full day. This act, though simple, is taken seriously. It is said that by wearing another's cloak, you carry not just their warmth, but their weight, their story, their unseen burdens and forgotten joys. Throughout the day, villagers behave according to the cloak. If they wear the hooded patchwork coat of the widowed carpenter, they walk slowly, pausing to touch every carved surface. If they wear the soft green wrap of the baker's son, they hum as they move and offer imaginary bread to birds. It is not mimicry. It is empathy through embodiment, a kind of gentle possession, accepted willingly. At sunset, all cloaks are returned, folded, brushed clean, and laid beside small tokens, a sprig of rosemary, a button, a smooth stone, a drawing of a bird. These gifts are left by the wearers as thanks. Over the years, the cloaks become more than garments. They become archives of kindness. A faded corner might hold the scent of someone's laughter, a fraying edge, the memory of forgiveness. No one ever knows exactly who wore their cloak. But when they put it on again the next morning, it feels different, softened, blessed. And somewhere, quietly, someone feels lighter too. Farther still, in a land shaped by fog and fiddle song, a different ritual hums beneath the surface of a cold and glimmering lake. This is the chorus of the unfinished words. Each winter, before the ice arrives, villagers walk to the shore with slips of parchment upon which they've written a single word, but not a complete one. Just a fragment, half a thought, a syllable still waiting for its partner. Lanth. They say the words aloud only once, whispering them into clay jars which are then sealed and set afloat on the water. All night the jars drift, nudged by wind and watched over by silent fires on the banks. By morning the lake is still. Some jars have sunk, others remain. Those that remain are gathered and cracked open. From inside, villagers pull the words, now softened by time, moisture and silence, and attempt to pair them. They sit in circles around the fires, combining fragments like puzzle pieces, laughing when the results are absurd, growing hushed when something unexpectedly beautiful appears. Lanthmere, Osha, Miro. They invent meanings for these new words, definitions that feel somehow already true. Osha, someone might declare, means the ache of forgetting someone before you wanted to. Lanthmere is the colour of a memory you wish had been real. These invented words are written into a book of Elsewhere, a heavy tome bound in blue leather and moss, stored in the village hall. Only one word is ever spoken aloud from the book. Each chosen word becomes a charm, a guiding symbol, whispered into thresholds, tied into braids, scratched into doorframes with chalk. A word that never existed until someone needed it, until it became real. So it is that in these quiet corners of history, these forgotten places and half-remembered villages, the medieval world reveals a secret truth. That joy need not roar, that fun can be sacred, that play in its strangest, softest forms can carry meaning deeper than sermons or swords. That laughter, when woven with tenderness and mystery, becomes not a sound, but a language, a way of belonging, a way of breathing. The fog rolls in before sunrise, thick and low, weaving through the chimneys and curling beneath doorways like a curious animal. The village seems to exhale slowly, roofs steeped in silver dew, fences sagging gently under the weight of moisture and memory. There is no sound, but the soft shuffle of feet, one, then another, then many more, as the people gather quietly in the town's worn centre. It is the morning of the ceremony of borrowed faces. Unlike other festivals of masks, of costume and jest, this one is not about disguise. It is about reflection, reverence. To take another's face is not a trick, it is a promise. The ritual begins with the drawing of the names. A woven basket, soft with velvet and smelling faintly of cloves, is passed hand to hand, each person reaching in to pull a slip of parchment. On each slip is a name, another villager chosen at random, the name of someone they know well, or hardly at all. Once read, the name is not spoken aloud. Instead, for the next 24 hours, the holder becomes the bearer of that name, not as an act of mimicry, not to mock or perform, but to observe, to inhabit. They dress in that person's clothes, borrowed ahead of time, folded with care. They perform their tasks, milk their goats, sweep their stoop, stir their porridge in circles known only to them. They carry their mannerisms gently, as if cupping water in their palms. They eat their favourite meal, sit in their favourite spot. They may not speak unless addressed directly. When they do, they answer only as the one whose name they carry. The villagers watching, the ones who are not being mirrored, are called the keepers. They walk among the borrowed faces with quiet vigilance, ensuring no act becomes caricature, no expression turns cruel. Should anyone laugh at another's portrayal, the keepers will take a bell from their belt and ring it once, a soft, sad chime. That person must leave the square, return the borrowed clothing, and spend the remainder of the day in silence. But most do not laugh. Most watch in awe as the blacksmith's apprentice becomes the widow who walks the orchard path each morning, dragging her fingers along the bark of each tree. As the priest's young daughter becomes the midwife, miming the careful kneeling, the slow pressure of hands on swollen bellies, the way she wipes her brow with the edge of her apron. At sunset, the villagers form a great circle and each borrowed face stands before the one whose name they carried. No words are exchanged, only a deep bow, an offering returned, a necklace, a ribbon, a written note, or a single pressed flower. And then they stand together, side by side, the self and the mirrored self. For a long time, they say nothing. They simply look and see. Not everyone chooses to participate, but all who watch are moved. It is a festival not of spectacle, but of gentleness, of witnessing, of saying, I tried to understand you, if only for a little while. And that, perhaps, is enough. Far to the east, where rivers fork like veins and reeds hiss secrets in the wind, a different form of fun unfolds. One born from chaos, misdirection and laughter that echoes through labyrinthine alleyways. It is called the Game of the Vanished Hour. It begins not with a bell, but with a disappearance. Somewhere in the village, a clock is stopped, deliberately and without warning. The time of its stopping is recorded by the elders, but hidden from all others. This marks the beginning of the vanished hour, a span of exactly 60 minutes during which all normal behaviour is suspended. For that hour, villagers are allowed, even encouraged, to live as though time has slipped its leash. Bakers abandon their bread mid-rise and dance in the streets. Tailors wear their spools of thread like crowns and speak only in rhymes. Children are allowed to chase geese through the chapel, and no one will scold them. But the greatest delight lies in trickery, playful, strange disruptions of the everyday. Someone might declare themselves mayor for the hour and demand attacks of compliments from all who pass. Another may build a time machine from barrels and broomsticks and invite travellers to board. Villagers create absurd artefacts and claim they are lost relics from the hour. A spoon that stirs only backwards, a cup that forgets what it holds, a glove that fits no hand but is always warm. But here's the twist. When the hour ends, silently, invisibly, everything must return to normal. Immediately, as if nothing ever happened. The baker resumes baking, the tailor picks up their needle. The geese return to the yard, and if someone continues the play too long, if they don't recognise that the hour has ended, they are given a small badge in the shape of a snail. It is worn for a day and lovingly mocked. Oh dear, people say with a smile, you lingered too long in lost time. But deep down, everyone envies the snail bearers, for they walked in the vanished hour so deeply they forgot the world beyond it. Elsewhere, on a grassy plain that hums with bees and holds the memory of wild horses, a different kind of strangeness blossoms once each spring, the orchard of unplanted fruit. This is no orchard in the usual sense. There are no trees, no roots, no rows. Instead, villagers arrive with fruits made by hand, sculpted from wax, carved from wood, sewn from fabric, painted on paper, blown from glass. Each fruit is crafted with care and intention, representing a feeling, a hope, a memory. One woman brings a velvet plum with a hollow centre, the space her husband left behind. A boy offers a glass pomegranate with petals folded inward, a secret he hasn't yet found the courage to share. Another carries a banana with its peel stitched shut, embroidered with the word someday. These fruits are placed gently on the ground in a wide open field, with small name tags, not names of people, but names of truths, almost. What I never said. For one day, people walk the orchard in silence, reading, kneeling, admiring. Some leave notes beside certain fruits. Others pick one up, cradle it, and sit for hours. At sunset, no one takes the fruit home. Instead, they are buried deep in the field, with songs sung under breath and a handful of wildflower seeds scattered above. By the next spring, the field will have changed. New blooms will appear in strange places, colours not seen the year before, blossoms with no known names, and the orchard, though invisible to most, will have grown. These are the games the world forgot. Not battles, not feasts, not parades of power or doctrine, but gentle absurdities, sacred nonsense, rituals made not for gods but for the soul. They did not seek glory, only connection, to walk for an hour as someone else, to plant what cannot grow and watch it bloom. To lose time, and in doing so, remember something softer, something essential, something beautifully, impossibly human. The final night arrives with a hush so deep, even the crickets seem to hold their breath. The sky is clear, sharp, infinite, a velvet vault pricked with stars that feel impossibly close, as though leaning in to listen. Smoke curls upward from a few last chimneys, lazy and unhurried, while the village lies wrapped in the comfort of exhaustion, the kind of weariness that follows wonder. But the hour is not over. There is one last ritual to keep. It is called simply, and with great affection, the Quiet Parade. Unlike any other celebration, the Quiet Parade has no start time. It begins when the first person decides they are ready, and it ends only when the last has joined. There is no music, no drums, no cheers, only the sound of soft feet on earth, of cloaks brushing against one another, of breath shared between kindred hearts. Each villager carries a lantern, but not of fire. These are lit by a paste of glowing moss, gathered days before from the stone walls near the river, gently stirred with crushed lavender and left in darkness until it begins to glow. The light is dim, gentle, greenish-blue, like moonlight kept in a jar. Each lantern is different. Some are shaped like birds or bells or stars. Others are no more than hollowed gourds wrapped in gauze. What matters is not the shape, but what they carry inside. Before joining the parade, each villager sits alone for a while, whispering into their lantern. Not wishes, not hopes, but memories, one each. A memory they do not want to carry anymore. It could be small, the time I said too much, or deep, the moment I knew he would not return, or strange, the dream I had 3 times as a child of the green door in the sky. Once whispered, the lantern is sealed with a soft knot of thread dipped in salt water and held close until the glow steadies. Then the bearer steps out into the night. The parade forms slowly, organically, one figure at a time. No one speaks. They walk in a long, winding line through the sleeping village, past the well, beneath the trees, beside the fields. They pass by places that once hurt, by windows where laughter once lived, by the doorsteps of the departed. Each step is a soft letting go. Children walk with parents. Elders walk alone. Strangers walk side by side. Some cry, but not from sadness. It is something softer, like moss breaking beneath your feet, like ice melting from memory. At the edge of the village lies a low hill with a hollowed basin of stone, an old crater said to have once held fire. It is there, in complete silence, that the villagers gather. One by one they place their lanterns inside. The moss glow pulses faintly, turning the crater into a sea of flickering green, like stars gathered on the earth itself. They do not burn, they simply fade, slowly, gently, until only darkness remains. Then together, the villagers sit, for minutes, for hours, however long they need. No one marks time. No one signals the end. When they rise, they walk home as if floating, lighter than before, their shadows smaller, and the crater, though empty of light, is filled with something else. The weight of shared forgetting. The peace of release. The Quiet Parade is not a festival of fun in the way most would understand, but in the medieval world, where days were long with labour and grief was stitched into the hem of every season, the idea of laying down one's burdens, of sharing silence in the company of others, was perhaps the purest kind of joy. In the months that follow, the village will return to its rhythms. Bread will be baked, cows milked, roofs patched. There will be laughter and noise and days of hardship. But something lingers from the parade, a softness in how the butcher wraps his paper. A gentler nod from the miller as you pass, the feeling that, in some way, even without words, you were seen, held, carried, just for a moment, by 100 quiet hands. And so as our journey through the peculiar pleasures of the medieval world comes to a close, we are left with more than oddities and forgotten games. We are left with the truth that beneath the chainmail and candlelight, behind the cathedrals and cobblestones, lived a people who, like us, longed for delight, for transformation, for softness. They carved joy from the bark of superstition, wove laughter into shadows, built sanctuaries of silliness in the middle of hard years. And through it all they reminded us, in whispers, in riddles, in rolling beds and talking stones, that to be human is to play, even in darkness, especially in darkness. So close your eyes if they are not already closed. Let the lanterns fade. Let the hour pass, and sleep now gently. In the arms of stories that once made strangers smile beneath the same stars, we still dream beneath tonight.